Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster. I'm a full-time professional fashion critic, and we are diving in deep on Paris Fashion Week Spring-Summer 2023. Fashion weeks are always confusingly pitched forward, so the Spring 2023 runway shows happen in October of 2022. It's hard to describe how many months of work me and my partner go through to attend, document, write about, and edit these 8 days of fashion excellence. So the video here is just part one of the roundup videos. We have a lot more coming for you. Massive thanks to everyone who supports on Patreon. This wouldn't be my job, and I certainly could not cover Fashion Week without every single one of y'all. Very excited for this one. Walking up to Heliot Emil. This is one of the only other brands that kind of tends to have like people tailgating it outside, or it's just like art school kids hanging out even though they can't go in. A lot of people who don't know who the brand is dress like the brand without realizing it. So it'll be interesting to see how they are working to evolve that.
My name is Julius Juul. I'm the creative director of Heliot Emil.
Tell me a little bit about how you divided up the looks, because there was this very purposeful segmentation of the show where we had what all of us thought was the complete show, and then we had this breaking point with the song, and then there was a whole set of looks that came in after that. What made you put looks in one section versus another?
So you have this like very fine, elegant vibe from like the opera singing, and then with that, the extreme contrast is like playing hardcore techno music, and then people come out in like extreme motorsports gear. So we strategically placed some of the harder stuff like in the second act, right after the choir, to really emphasize that sort of like industrial, elegant sort of like pairing.
And the techno was all generated by AI, correct?
Yeah, so Lorem is an artist who works with soundscapes in very interesting ways. So he takes a lot of different sounds and put them together, and then the machine learns. A lot of it is generated with AI, and then he kind of like pieces it together to sound more like fluid in an interesting way. Exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, after it's like we all come into runway shows and we expect that I'm going to get hit with some big music thing at the beginning, and so that was sort of expected. But then when we had the palette cleanser and then it comes back in, it was just like a punch in the face. What are some pieces of hardware that you kind of grew up with before you were designing that you feel a great like connection to?
I always was very fascinated by like technology and like the insides of computers and machinery and that kind of stuff. So like opening the engine and seeing what's inside, not necessarily like the dirty side of it, but more like the technical side of it. So seeing how everything is like pieced together and looking at things that aren't necessarily meant to be super beautiful, but with that in mind, they're just like created out of necessity, like they're placed like that, and then that creates this like super interesting moment where people are just like completely disregarding how it looks visually, and that's when the interesting things happen, when people are like, this is like complete randomness almost.
This is awesome.
My voice is like paralyzed after 4 days of constant screaming.
Y'all know we don't really go in chronological order with these shows, so we're going to fast forward to the final show of the week with Xuly Bet, who celebrated their 30th anniversary show this year. It's pretty cool because they did a show setup similar to the first runway that they ever did. A guerrilla show that was open to the public and free. It was extremely cool to see all the familiar fashion faces from the week gathered with the friends and families of the models, along with just random folks who wanted to see what was going on. The police actually came at one point, but they weren't disruptive at all. They just kept everyone on the sidewalk so that traffic could continue to move through. Xuly Bet is in the same tradition as Martin Margiela and Rei Kawakubo, making use of deconstructive details, but they bring their own flavor to that look with a joyfulness that permeates the entire brand. This one was really cool to see. It is so hard to maintain yourself professionally in the Paris Fashion Week space, and these guys have done it for 30 years. Here's to 30 more. One thing to note about my trips to Paris Fashion Week specifically is the scale. There's about 100 brands that showed on the calendar this season, and I attended 44 runways and showrooms. That's about half of literally everything. Some days we were literally running around Paris for 12 hours in a single day. Whenever I travel like this, I'm super cost conscious, and I try to make the most out of every second that I'm there. And speaking of which, this is just part one of the coverage here. We'll have 2 more roundup videos and a ton of other videos about the trip overall. The only way that I'm able to pay for this is because of the Patreon, which is essentially a subscription service to tip content creators that you love. Despite what you may think, YouTube pays very little, so I depend on your support through Patreon, so I have the budget to offer you the best coverage that I can possibly give. It starts at just $3 a month, which is kind of our student tier for all of the broke fashion school kids. We have a $9 a month tier and $30 a month for the folks who really believe in this project. This channel can't exist without help, so if you get value from these videos, I humbly ask that you pitch in. Let's get back into it. Thom Browne was up next, and wow, this show was a lot. Firstly, it was in the single most ornate building I've ever been to, the Palais Garnier. And when we walked in, the lights were so incredibly bright that you could barely see anything. This was to give us a sense of otherworldliness, as the central theme of this show was a fairy tale, the Cinderella story. The more that I dug into this show, the more that I had to say about it, so we're gonna go all the way in and give this its own episode, so you can look for that in the coming weeks. Okay, so we're walking up to Ruohan. We had multiple scheduling mix-ups. I'm a mess. Okay, so it turns out that Ruohan was the single best small designer at Paris Fashion Week. One easy way to make me happy is to focus on textiles, and her brand's greatest strengths is the fabrics. Unfortunately, that does make it hard to film. Textiles are something that are meant to be experienced, but to mitigate that, we did speak with the designer herself.
Yeah, I'm the designer of the brand Ruohan.
Tell me a little bit about how you approach draping, if you could.
Like for example, this one, the drape, actually I was inspired by one of the Renaissance fresco, and then the drape on the body was like that in one of the frescoes painting. So I was like trying to portray it in like a modern way.
Tell me about what textiles you really love.
I feel like usually other brands, when they pursue textile, you need to be bold or need to be recognized. But for me, I feel like I don't want people to be really recognized, like, oh, that's like a very cool textile with a lot of colors, with a lot of threads, lots of like textures. But if when you try it on, you feel like a different touch on your body, that's something I would love to pursue. For example, the wax Cupro I'm wearing, we made the Cupro transfer to Italy to take the coated with wax. So it's like, and then we wash it so many times, so you can like literally wash it in your laundry. But it has this subtle touch in it, has like little weight on it, but it's comfortable. And then for like the pro neck that you were saying, that was actually satin organza, but we treated with A.W.A.K.E, which is a primer for oil painting. I was doing that because I was inspired by the frescoes, Renaissance frescoes, and then when they prepared the wall to paint, they used a kind of primer, but I cannot find that primer. I was like, okay, I just use a modern touch to portray that idea. So I was like finding, okay, what kind of material I should use to prepare my fabric. And I was thinking about, what about just use like very simple oil painting primer. That's why I use A.W.A.K.E to treat on satin organza, treat on silk chiffon. Usually silks gives like a very fragile or like very soft way, but when you treat it with that, it gives like a more modern look.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. And for anyone who watched my previous Fashion Week coverage, we are back with your favorite boy, Kevin Germanier. Hello again.
Thank you for actually saving me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
From the heat of the inside.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, we're doing it outside. Yeah, that was a smart move.
So I know that the runway stuff specifically is all going to be out of recycled materials.
Yes.
And then there's, I know, an ongoing challenge of incorporating as much recycled materials into the actual product as we can. How, because that honestly, it might be one of the biggest challenges in fashion right now. How is that challenge coming?
For example, let's say some buyers, there's two buyers, they want both the same shirt. I don't have enough to make it both orders in white, so maybe I will just do it first, the first one in like off-white and the second one in white. And it's a constant collaboration with the buyers as well, and the customer loves it because it's like what you find in Paris from Germany is not what you find in Brazil, for example. So I think for me it's just like almost become like you have your own piece and it makes it rare, and that's what people want from me.
It's an added layer to the luxury element of it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. This season I was like, let's just do what scares me the most, which is chaos. And I really wanted to explore new material. We had toys, we had broken jewelry, we had actually like a dinosaur, you know, like those little figure. And then we just cut them and make beads. I'm the bead master, so I can make beads out of anything really. So I don't want to get stuck in the fact that I'm only making like beautiful dresses. I can do like a lot of stuff, and stay tuned because there are more coming. So
perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, walking up to Issey Miyake. Satoshi Kondo has done excellent stuff with the brand since Issey kind of passed it on to him, wanted to kind of step back a little bit more. I imagine he will take this time as just a tribute. But I was wrong. I was totally wrong. In fact, the only tribute to Issey was in this one photo of him that emerged at the beginning of the presentation. After everything was over, I went backstage to speak with Satoshi Kondo through a translator, and one of the things that he told journalists was that this show wasn't a tribute to his teacher. Kondo said that he's continuing to do what he's always done, and that really, his whole career, is a tribute to Issey. And that's such an excellent answer to that question. The collection itself was divided up into categories, most of which were based on the idea of sculptures interacting with the body. Kondo and his team actually created a number of sculptures in the studio to begin the design process, and I imagine that some of those sculptures were represented in the massive cloth statues that were in the middle of the runway. At the end of the show, the models all came together for one of the most fluid, beautiful floods that I've ever seen on a runway. I'm not embarrassed at all to say that I cried at the end of this one. It was a really beautiful show. Okay, going up to Gauchere, we had a literal emergency that involved a doctor last Fashion Week, and so I wasn't able to go to this brand, which kind of sucked. They were very understanding about it, very cool, and now we're gonna go. It's the first show of the day. I'm really excited. This was wonderful. This was so great. Can you just tell me a little bit about the collection in general?
Yes, actually the collection was quite inspired by the location, and I really always have a great feeling when I came here, and I love the fact that there's so much glass and you have a certain transparency, and at the same time you can't really look through, so you don't really know what's going on. There are ideas, I think, in the collection through the construction of volumes that I created, pleating, wrinkling things, everything that was cut off or loose or opening the body in a way, really something that kind of is breaking off, changing.
And the glass matches so well with the collection because you have the cutouts and there is kind of that like seeing through, and if you layer it, there is kind of that confusion of like what is going on, like which parts are separate garments and stuff.
Yes.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Next up was A.W.A.K.E Mode, and fair warning, this segment is going to be really different than the rest of the video. So, fashion designers spend a lot of their lives looking at and choosing textiles. From our perspective, the public, it doesn't really seem very difficult. Most people think designers spend more time on their color palette or on mood boards. But once you look into it, there's so many ways that textiles can be expressed. Even a simple cotton jersey, there's hundreds, I mean really like thousands of variants that can affect the hand, the movement, the way that it catches light, everything. I bring this up so that I can show you my single favorite dress of all of Paris Fashion Week. This one. I'll be honest with you, I was really tired when I attended the A.W.A.K.E Mode show. It was close to the end of Fashion Week, I was groggy, and I was kind of irritated. I definitely was not in the type of mood that makes me pass out praise for no reason. But yeah, there's nothing really revolutionary about this dress. The shape is fairly straightforward, the color is beautiful, but it's a color that we've all seen before. And the fabric is gorgeous, but it's not a new creation by any means. But listen, if you design clothes, you need to pay attention to this dress. The genius here is not in one of these elements, it's in the combination of those elements. That shape with that color, and especially that textile, the perfect amount of translucence, catching the light in just the right way. This isn't a combination that just makes sense, it's the perfect combination, and it's one that makes this dress more than the sum of its parts. Beautiful, beautiful work here. I hope Natalia Alaverdian is proud. She really, really nailed this one. It is whimdy. Alright, that was it. That's all I had. Undercover time. Undercover. It is very hard for me to describe how personally significant it is to me that I am going to an actual undercover runway show. This is not a showroom. It's not a resi. This is a show. And it's women's wear. Jun Takahashi has talked a lot before about how he didn't want to do runway shows for men initially because he was like, menswear is something that I can just do. It's very easy for me to make menswear. He's like, with women's wear, I can be much more conceptual, and so it's much more fun to do a runway presentation. And we definitely see see that throughout the history of Undercover. Some of their best runway shows have all been women's wear. And so there was a long period where they were only showing for menswear. He made the big switch a few years ago, and now he is showing for women's wear again. I'm really excited to kind of see this because it's sort of a new era for him. Also, I wore what is one of my favorite Undercover pieces of all time, which is like a trompe-l'oeil of a jacket with a cardigan sweater over it. It's very like emblematic of what I feel like Jun is very good at as a designer. This season, Jun Takahashi took us into a cathedral for a mournful show. The collection opened with women's suiting that had been gashed open in multiple places to reveal a delicate fabric that I imagine was supposed to represent guts. Every model who walked wore Chanel-style black-toed shoes, but unlike Chanel, the shoes were pointed instead of round. That hard-edged take on a luxurious piece of fashion history matched well with the heavy, unpolished brass jewelry that held raw, semi-precious stones, uncut, where the beauty of them is, I think, supposed to lie more in their potential. And every model who walked featured a hairstyle that was strongly reminiscent of devil horns, which was a symbol that I was uncertain about until one model walked in a t-shirt that simply said angel with yet another hard slash straight through the letters. An added layer is that every model was crying. There was suiting, contemporary t-shirts, and almost some couture type pieces. There's all walks of women's lives in a 49-look show, and each one has suffered a major blow, their clothes reflecting the difficulties and loss that they now have to carry with them. Backstage, while I joined the lineup of journalists, Jun was asked about the pain this show was so clearly discussing, and he said that the pain from the pandemic was something that he was still processing. He wasn't over it yet. But he is back. Jun Takahashi has returned to Paris, and he has been gone for a long time, choosing instead to show in his home of Japan during the last few years. There was a song that played during the show, Patti Smith's cover of the old American folk song called Trampin'. It's a simple little song about moving forward. It has a weary tone, like honestly, Patti sounds emotionally exhausted while she sings it. But the tone is optimistic. She can see better things ahead. So it's Patti and Jun Takahashi, the models of this show, and kind of everybody. We're all moving on, kind of picking up the pieces after the last few years and moving our lives forward.
My name is Paula Canovas, and I am a fashion designer. I've been really interested in how, especially through the pandemic, how we consume fashion. It's something we wear, and I feel like we feel with all our senses, but we only consume it through the eyes. I was really interested by this idea, and I was like, how can we make people experience our clothes that to me are so textural? And actually one of the comments that people get are like, oh my God, I feel like I could eat that bag. How could we translate that into the clothing? So I started doing a lot of research on the senses. We live in an ocular-centric era that the eye has taken over all the other senses. So I wanted to play a little bit on that concept, and then there are references like Peter Greenaway, The Cook, The Thief, The Wife and His Lover, that last scene where like he actually eats the man. I'm quite obsessed with this idea of like consuming in a way that it's not visual, and also creating clothes that appeal to the senses, not only to the eyes.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Then it was time for Sacai, the Japanese label headed up by Chitos Abe, a former pattern cutter for Comme des Garçons. Reviewing anything by Sacai is going to always feel like a disservice to my own audience and especially to Miss Abe. You could spend hours talking about what's going on in this show or honestly any Sacai show. Everything from this brand has the imagination of an ambitious fashion school student and the precise finishings of an IKEA product, both on the runway and in stores. I mean, look, I'm just going to show you some detail images from the press release. This shit is brilliant. Everything from Sacai teeters on the edge of being too chaotic, but because they're a maison that puts patterns first, it always comes out brilliantly. The gist of this show was that they incorporated a very skinny pleated pant into their arsenal for the first time, but we truly would need a couple of hours to fully walk out what all is happening in these 40 looks. If you're not familiar with Sacai already, I strongly encourage you to check out this brand in detail. They are absolutely worth your time. The last stop of day 7 was Olivier Theyskens, who had a completely different offering than any other designer this week. Throughout his career working for many different fashion houses, Olivier has saved every fabric swatch he's ever ordered. And now those little bits are being used through these incredible handmade pieces that sell for about the same price as a car. It's interesting, most people who watch this channel probably hear the word patchwork and think about Capital or Junya Watanabe, but Olivier is really searching for a new grammar with patchwork. It actually took me a while to associate what I was looking at here with that term. We don't have the space here to really dive fully into the details of this collection, but if you're interested in it, and you should be, Dana Thomas wrote an outstanding feature piece for this collection for the New York Times. I'll link that in the description. The anonymous design team at Ann Demeulemeester presented an entirely monochromatic collection that managed to keep my attention for 20 whole minutes. The monochrome palette was explored through the space as well. We saw the background rendered in monochrome, even their lighting stretched slowly across the runway, pulling the audience out of darkness. Ann Demeulemeester is a brand that's been through an enormous amount of changes the last few years. I researched a lot beforehand to find out who the current creative director is before finally having it confirmed with the brand that there just isn't one. And the design team's decision makers, there's multiple, didn't want to do any post-show interviews. What we know about the design team is that it is comprised of some former Margiela employees, and I might have guessed that since I could spot that wet look reference anywhere. And that actually ended up being my favorite part of the show, an open blouse that was held in place under a tight sheer layer on top. This was clearly a product-driven show, and even without the singularity of one creative vision, the product from this show is very compelling. It's all strikingly unisex. Even the long skirts and the big lapelled blazers seem devoid of any gender. The styling of this collection used 2 crossbody bags as modern peignets, but the clothes seem to be more indicative of an exploration of the rendering of color in different textures. You can see it clearly in black here, but it's still present in the white looks as well. Overall, this was the strongest collection that we've seen from the Ann Demeulemeester team in a while. I'm excited to see how they continue to develop this in the next 6 months. Alright, the video is done. Now you're free to join the Patreon. Go join it up. Like I said, this is only the beginning. We'll be covering roughly half of everything that happened at Paris Fashion Week's Spring 2023 season, and when that's done, we're going to do a bunch of deep dives into some of the more nuanced runway shows, and there's a special project coming up as well. A lot of excellence coming your way. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I do not take that for granted. I'll see you back here at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday for the next video. I love you all with the white hot intensity of 1,000 suns. Goodbye.